Hello everybody, welcome to this third video of the agroecology lecture. Today we will speak about crop association in general. So it means we will talk about the concept, give a few examples on what is possible and why it is useful. We will not go into the details because afterwards during the field trip at El Adale station you will see some of the crop association on the farm, and then my colleague Quentin will give a lecture on the association more specifically on the different examples. So first of all, to introduce the concept here, you have an opposition between on the left plot with crop association here with eggplants, onions, carrots, and on the right you have a monoculture with only one crop, I think here soybean. So of course we see a huge difference, mostly in biodiversity, and of course on the right you have a huge field with just one crop, and on the left you have different crops on a small field. But monoculture is not only to have one crop on a huge area, it's also the case if you have only one crop on a small plot, it's still a monoculture. But of course, the disadvantages of the monoculture system on a small area is less important than a huge area, and the advantage of the crop association, like you can see on the right, is also less smaller than in comparison to a huge monoculture field. So why are crop association useful? Firstly, when it has to do with pest control, as we discussed on the last video, it's useful because of the discontinuity of resources. So if you have, like for instance, in this picture, um, an association of onion with Tuggetti courgette, and then of course the distance and the easiness for the pest and disease to get from one line of onion to the other is bigger, and the speed of the spreading of the disease and pest will be smaller. Then, of course, you have a higher biodiversity with crop association, as we saw on the picture before. And this means, as we saw in the last video, that if you have a higher biodiversity of plants, you have a higher biodiversity of insects, and then you have potentially more beneficial insect or animals or microorganisms on your field that can control your pest and disease by themselves. Then you can, if you have a crop association, you can plant a crop that attract a particular beneficial that you want to have in your field to protect another crop. You can also associate your crop with a trap plant, so that the trap plant will trap the pest and that way will protect the crop. For instance, in the push-pull system that we will uh, discuss later and that you will see at El Adale, you have either Pennisetum or Bracharia around the crop of cereal, mostly maize or sorghum, and then this Pennisetum or Bracharia will pull the pest so that the pest will lay the eggs in the Pennisetum or the Bracharia, and the Pennisetum or Bracharia will kill the eggs, and by doing so prevent the spreading of the pest in the maize crop. So there are other examples of trap plants that you could use to protect a crop. You can then associate a sensible crop with a general repelling plant or crop. So there are a few crops or plants that can be used to repel most of a lot of different pests. For example, chili, ginger, onion, garlic, marigold, and nasturtium. So the first one are also crops, so it's really interesting to associate them because you have two crops. One is protecting the other, but you have to harvest. Marigold, also taget, and nasturtium are flowers, so you might not be able to do anything with the harvest, but you can still plant them with the crop to protect it. Then you can plant specific repellent plants like onion. You could plant with carrot to protect carrot, or you could plant carrot with onion to protect onion. This way it's really an interesting association. Or you can plant desmodium with cereal, and desmodium will repel different pests of the cereal like the armyworm or the stem borer. Um, and lastly, in case of destruction of a crop by a pest, then you can harvest the other crop and you still have something to harvest, in opposition to a monoculture where you would have nothing if the harvest fails. Association are also beneficial not only for pest control but also generally. Firstly, because of a better soil cover, like for example, and so I mean because you can use different uh, you can associate crops that have, for example, different speed of growth. For instance, maize is really slow at the beginning, so you could and then you have a really bare soil. And if you plant it, for example, with pumpkin can cover the soil before the maize is big enough to protect the soil. So that is an example. Um, so you can either use crops that are complementary in time, so that one crop will cover the ground before the other grows, or you can also use crops that are complementary in space, then one plant will cover the ground and the other will go more in the height. So, I mean, pumpkin and maize is an example that goes for both space and time complementarity. So of course you can also, it is interesting to associate crops that have complementary in space as well to use the most space that you can have. For instance, pumpkin and maize, as I said, one will mostly grow on the ground, the other will rise, and you can add beans, climbing beans on it, so that the bean can use the maize as a tutor. So then you have a really high complementarity of use of space. Then you can, it is interesting to associate the crops because of the different use of soil resources. For instance, cereals will use a lot of nitrogen, and if you associate them with legumes don't need nitrogen because of the symbiosis with rhizobia. They might be able to provide some of the nitrogen to the maize, but mostly they will not be in concurrence with maize for nitrogen, and the opposite, they will need a lot of phosphorus, which the maize might need less. Then you also have the diversification of production. So firstly, as I said before, if one crop fails, you can still sell the other, but also you have two products to sell. So if the price is bad for one, you can still get money with the other, and so on. You can associate crop that you harvest at different time. For instance, you can intercrop salad with cabbage. There are also some other advantage of the association, but mostly you will use the space between the cabbage to grow salad before the cabbage is big enough to cover the soil. And then you will have a first harvest of salad who will not impact actually the harvest of cabbage, because you will plant the cabbage at the same density that you would in a monocrop. And at the end, you often have a higher yield than a monoculture. Sometimes it's not logical. We will discuss about it later, but usually you get at the end more yield with the different crops that you have than if you only have one crop. So to summarize everything, you have a complementarity of the crops you want to associate. So it doesn't make sense to associate crops that are not complementary. At the minimum, it can be useless, and then you just have two different crops, which is not that bad, but it also can be counterproductive if you associate the wrong crops. So just before I said that usually you have a higher yield than in monoculture. Often we don't think so, because of course you have a lower yield of maize if you associate it with pumpkin and bean than if you just plant maize on your crop. But you have what we have to think is if you intercrop with bean and pumpkin, you also have bean and pumpkin to harvest. So if you get the total yield of all these three crops, you usually have a higher yield than just the maize, even if the yield of the maize only is lower in the intercropping than in the monocropping. So to evaluate this how to say to evaluate this to compare the yield of different intercropping with monocropping or with different intercropping, we use the so-called land equivalent ratio. So the idea is to evaluate how much land you actually spare by intercropping. So in one case, you want to know how much land you would need in a monocropping to produce that much, as much as you have on one field of intercropping of the different crops. So the formula goes that way. You will do for each of the crop, you will have the yield of the crop in the association divided by the yield in monoculture, and you will add the different crops. Um, if you have three crops, you will do, for example, you have maize, bean, and squash. You will uh, divide the yield of maize on the intercropping with the yield of maize in monoculture, plus you will divide the yield of bean in the association divided by yield of bean in monoculture, plus the same for squash. And at the end you get a number. If you get 1, it means there's no advantage of the crop association to the monoculture, so it means that you just would need you need exactly the same place if you have 3 separate fields, one with maize, one with bean, one with squash, as if you just plant on the 3 fields the 3 crops. But if you have a LER which is higher than 1, it means that it's more productive than the monoculture, so you will need less space if you have the 3 crops on one field than if you have 3 fields with each of the crop. And then if you get lower than 1, it means that you actually need more space if you plant them together as if you plant them separately. So of course, um, you almost always get a better result with intercropping than with monoculture if you calculate like this. And of course, it is not always the same because maybe you really want to have maize and you don't really care how much bean and squash you get because maybe you don't get a lot of money with it. So it still has to be, um, yeah, you have to take into consideration more factors to evaluate what you want to do. But on pure yield result, you almost, if you have a complementary association, you almost always get a better LER. So now we will just look at an example to understand the principle correctly. So often, as I said before, often you think that you tend to think that the monoculture gets better results than intercropping because you often have a better yield of the one crop. So this is why it is really important to calculate and to be able to understand the LER principle. So for example, if you get here an association of maize and apple fruits, then if you look only at the maize, you will get 5 ton an hectare in the monocropping. And if you plant it together with apple fruits, you will only get 4 ton an hectare. So you might think it's not interesting to plant it with the apple fruit. But of course, in the case of the polyculture, you get 4 ton of hectare of maize, but you also get 9 ton an hectare of apples. So you get this much apple, and on the other case, you get only the maize, and separately you get 15 ton an hectare of apples if you plant apples alone. And then if you calculate the ELIA, you will get 1.4, which means you will need only 1 hectare of polyculture, also of association of maize and apple, to get as much as you will need with 1.4 hectares of separate fields of grain and apple. So if you look at the picture above, you see that to get the 4 tons that you have on the hectare of polyculture, you will need 0.8 hectares of maize or less, and to get the 9 ton of apple, you will get 0.6. But if you add them together, of course, you get 1.4. So you need more land in monoculture to produce 4 ton of grain and 9 ton of apple that you produce only on 1 hectare if you associate them. Okay, so I hope you understood the principle of the LER. Now we will look at a few examples of possible association, but we will not go into details for yet. So first we have the association of cereal and legume. It is an association known and practiced all over the world for thousands of years. So every population on Earth understood that it was interesting to associate these two type of crops. So why is that? Firstly, because of the complementarity in space. Cereal are erected while legumes are mostly doing bush or climbing. The root system is complementary. Cereal have powerful and deep root system, while legumes have superficial, shallow root system. The nitrogen use that I said before, so cereals need a lot of nitrogen, uh, which will force legume to promote biological fixation with rhizobia. And the phosphorus use, legumes are able to mobilize phosphorus in the soil by secreting acids and phosphates and things like that, which render the phosphorus more available in the soil also for the cereal. So here just a few examples of possible associations. So you could associate corn with soybean, peanut, cowpea, green bean. So this is possible association for Ethiopia, wheat with chickpea, barley with peas, and here on the you have for both crop a possible density in the association. So Quentin will go a bit more in details on this in a lecture later on. A more specific association is this three-sister association, which is also called milpa. It was practiced by the Mayas in Central America. So the idea is to associate maize with climbing bean and squash. Then you have corn as a stake for climbing bean. So in plus to all the advantage of the normal legume cereal association, you have here the ability of bean to use corn as a stake. So you can plant the corn at the same density as when as alone, because the bean can just climb on it and doesn't need more place. And the squash will optimize the soil cover between the lines of maize bean, mostly before the maize is big enough to cover the soil. So you could plant corn and bean with a distance of also 57 between the lines, 40 on the line, and then you just put one bean between each of the maize. It is advised to wait 2 weeks after the sowing of the maize to plant the bean, but you can also plant them at the same time. And then in between you can sow lines of squash with 2.5 meter between the plants. Another possible cereal legume association, which is which is a bit more, which is more advantageous than just the normal cereal legume association, is the so-called push-pull system, which was discovered in Kenya in the maybe 15 years ago, something like that, by an entomologist. So it's really the result of modern science and not of traditional knowledge. The idea is to plant desmodium together with the cereal crop. Desmodium is a legume, is a fodder legume, um, and the desmodium will repel stem borers and armyworms. So this is the idea of the push system. In addition to that, desmodium is a leguminous, so it will fixate nitrogen. It's a good fodder, so you can give it to animals after the harvest. and it stays really low on the ground, so it does not impact the mice. And finally, Desmodium is able to provoke a suicide generation of striga seed, and so it's also able to control the striga weed if in the areas where it's a big problem. So this is all the advantages of Desmodium, the push aspect of the push-pull system. And then around the field you will plant Penicetum or Bracharia in drier region. These are high quality for the grasses, so this is also interesting. You get really with this modium and Penicetum bracharia, you get really a good fodder mixture for your cattle. And of course, as I mentioned before, this grass will attract and trap the pests. So they will lay the eggs in it, and the eggs will be killed by the plant. So you will be able to see this system established at El Adaleh farm. Another possibility is to intercrop rice, rain-fed rice with Tilosanthes. Tilosanthes is also a legume which which can survive to really dry condition. So which is really good to regenerate soil. So this is really a system to grow rice in areas where the soil is really not fertile and where the water management is difficult. Another advantage is after you harvest the rice, you can just leave the Stylosanthes, which will grow in the dry season and produce fodder. Then a few examples of vegetable association. So you can plant onion, garlic on order of this family with other small vegetable because these species repel some of the pests. But of course, you should associate with other small vegetables, otherwise the competition will be too high for the. You can plant some other generalistic repellent species with your vegetable, for example, ginger, mint, or lemongrass. You can plant them directly with the vegetable or around the fields, for example. You can also plant aromatic herbs, mostly with Solanaceae, like tomato and eggplant. So these are more European crops. But you find also some in Africa. So it could be basil, thymian, oregano. So marigold and nasturtium are really effective at repelling whiteflies, and so they could be used to protect mostly tomatoes or pepper, eggplants. So in general about vegetable association, so this is in general, there are some exceptions, so you should not always follow this, but in general, Alliaceae, so garlic and onion family, are able to protect Apiaceae, so carrot and celery family. Marigold and nasturtium are good to protect Solanaceae and Brassicas, and aromatic herbs or Lamiaceae protect almost all of the vegetables. You should not plant alliums with so onion and so with legumes because they have a negative impact. Brassicas have a negative impact on rosaceous plants. That is, I think, in Ethiopia not really important except if you plan to plant strawberry. And Solanaceae brassicae, so cabbage with tomato and so, are often unfavorable. And usually it's not interesting to associate crops of the same family, even if it usually does not have negative impact. So to know what to associate exactly, you can use these tables. You have all the different vegetables on the X and on the epsilon axis. So you can see if it's green, it is a positive association with some positive impact. So with the table, you don't know what exactly, but you know that it is positive. If it's red, it's negative, so you should not associate this crop. And if it's yellow, it's just the same family, and if it's white, it's just neutral. So you could associate them, but there are no positive impact of it. So for example, you can look at cabbage. Cabbage you can associate, for example, with beetroot, with different cucurbit, with eggplant. You should not associate with Alliaceae here, garlic, leek, and onion. And I don't know where's the. Oh yeah, salad is not in this. See, yeah, it's lettuce. So you can of course associate the cabbage with the lettuce, and so on. You can just use this table to know what to associate with the different crops. As I said before, specifically good association is the association of carrot and onion because they repel each other uh, best. And you could also add potato, and then you could have one ridge of carrot onion, one ridge of potato, and then with the discontinuity of resources, you would limit the spread of the fungal disease on potato, as well as the other advantage of carrot onion association. So this was for today, just a small introducing in crop association, and in the few example, you will see some of them at Eladale, and Quentin will talk more specifically about the different association. Thanks a lot for your attention, and see you next week.